quiet weight of the moment lingered long after the gathering resumed its shallow rhythm. The sounds of clinking utensils, rehearsed laughter, and artificial concern blended into a distant murmur, as though the entire room existed behind a thick pane of glass. She remained seated with the same controlled posture, yet her senses sharpened with unfamiliar precision. Every movement around her carried a deeper meaning now, revealing patterns she had ignored for years. Throughout her life, she had occupied the silent edges of every room, watching the same unbalanced dynamic unfold again and again. Her sister moved with the effortless confidence of someone who had never encountered consequences, gliding through conversations with a polished charm that impressed adults and intimidated peers. The family had always embraced that brightness without questioning the shadows it produced. They believed her to be ambitious, spirited, admirable. They never noticed the concealed entitlement beneath her practiced smile. Meanwhile, the quiet one learned to survive by shrinking her presence, absorbing the blame others cast upon her, and withholding every emotion that attempted to rise to the surface. She developed a muted resilience, one that never demanded recognition. Her stillness became both her refuge and her disguise, protecting her from confrontations she could never win. Yet in that single moment earlier, when a familiar cruelty resurfaced in front of everyone, something subtle but irreversible unfolded within her. The silence she carried no longer resembled withdrawal. It began to form an internal shape, steady and deliberate, moving through her thoughts like a slow and calculated current preparing itself for a purpose no one around her would recognize until it was far too late. The earliest betrayal had occurred long before the gathering, during a period when she still believed that quiet endurance eventually produced fairness. It happened gradually, layered within months of small manipulations that appeared harmless on the surface. At that time, she had been working toward an opportunity that carried immense personal meaning. She had devoted quiet hours to preparation, hoping to shift the direction of her life through steady effort rather than attention-seeking ambition. Her sister had known about this goal, had known how deeply it mattered, and had known that it represented the quiet one's attempt to claim something entirely her own. The knowledge did not soften her. Instead, it awakened a concealed hunger for dominance that the family had unknowingly encouraged for years. With subtle interventions disguised as accidental involvement, she began influencing the outcome. A misplaced document here, a delayed message there, an incorrectly relayed instruction at the perfect moment. None of it appeared suspicious in isolation, yet each action eroded the foundation the quiet one had built with such careful intention. When the opportunity finally slipped out of reach, the reason seemed almost mundane. A minor miscommunication, an unexplained absence, a missing requirement that had never been passed along. The family responded with indifferent acceptance, convinced that the quiet one had simply failed to meet the expected criteria. Nobody asked questions. Nobody examined the sequence of small inconsistencies. The loss settled upon her with an ache that spread slowly, tightening around her resolve like a constricting band. Her sister moved through the aftermath with effortless indifference, maintaining the same charming glow that protected her from suspicion. There were no gloating expressions, no dramatic displays of triumph, only an undercurrent of satisfaction visible to the quiet one alone, a subtle confirmation that the damage had been intentional. This betrayal did not ignite anger. Instead, it created an expanding emptiness that altered the shape of her internal world. For the first time, silence no longer felt like a shield. It began to resemble a reservoir, collecting every overlooked injustice, every ignored wound, and every unchallenged cruelty. The quiet one understood something essential then. Her sister believed that her stillness signified helplessness. She had no idea that stillness could preserve far more than pain, could preserve memory, could preserve clarity, and in the right moment it could release everything. The breaking point arrived without any dramatic announcement, yet it altered the rhythm of her existence with absolute finality. It occurred on an afternoon wrapped in ordinary tasks, the kind of day that usually passed unnoticed. The family had gathered again for a minor celebration, and the environment carried the same predictable arrangement of roles. Her sister occupied the center with practiced radiance, while she remained positioned at the edges, almost blending into the background. Throughout the event, her sister moved with a heightened sense of confidence, as though she had discovered a new level of entitlement. The quiet one observed every gesture with the same calm expression she had perfected over the years. Nothing seemed unusual until a sudden shift in the atmosphere signaled the unfolding of something familiar, yet far more deliberate. Her sister had prepared another moment of humiliation, constructed carefully enough to appear spontaneous, yet targeted with unrestrained precision. It was not loud, nor was it chaotic. It was subtle enough for the family to dismiss instantly, but sharp enough to cut through the last remaining strands of trust she had kept intact. The room reacted with the same predictable silence, the same gentle acceptance that always protected the wrong person. The unspoken hierarchy strengthened itself once again, pressing her deeper into the invisible space reserved for those who were expected to endure without protest. For a brief moment, she felt the familiar ache of resignation. It washed through her like an old instinct trained into her bones. However, this time the sensation did not settle. It lifted, dissolved, and left behind an unfamiliar stillness. Her perception sharpened in a way she had never experienced before. Every detail around her appeared painfully clear. The shifting eyes, the suppressed amusement, the effortless dismissal. Her sister's expression carried a confidence shaped by years of unquestioned dominance. Something shifted deep within her, not with rage but with a quiet certainty that replaced the helplessness she once accepted as permanent. She realized that endurance had never protected her. It had only allowed the cycle to continue. In that single moment, her silence transformed from passive acceptance into something far more deliberate. It became a boundary. It became a strategy. It became a decision. She remained seated with an outwardly unchanged composure, yet her internal world restructured itself with a calm that felt almost surgical. She understood with complete clarity that nothing would alter unless she altered it herself. And she understood that her sister would never stop until she encountered a consequence powerful enough to dismantle her carefully constructed superiority. The breaking point did not ignite immediate action. Created direction. It generated a purpose that settled deeply into her thoughts, anchoring itself with unwavering determination. She did not leave the room in anger. She left with a silence that no longer resembled retreat. It resembled preparation. The days that followed the breaking point unfolded with an outward normalcy that concealed the quiet shift occurring within her. She continued moving through her routines with the same unobtrusive calm the family had come to expect, yet every moment carried a newly sharpened awareness. Nothing escaped her attention anymore. Every habit, every careless comment, every repeated pattern revealed a blueprint she had never bothered to examine before. Her sister moved through the household with her usual confident rhythm, never noticing the subtle transformation forming in the background. She remained convinced that the quiet one posed no threat, that silence signified surrender, that invisibility meant insignificance. This belief allowed her to continue her careless behavior without caution, and it allowed the quiet one to observe without interference. The preparation began with small, almost imperceptible actions. She started reviewing old documents, revisiting digital traces, and uncovering forgotten exchanges that revealed the fingerprints of earlier manipulations. Each discovery connected seamlessly to another, forming an intricate web of patterns her sister had never expected anyone to piece together. The quiet one stored everything with meticulous precision, not out of spite, but out of a growing clarity about what must eventually be exposed. She learned the timing of her sister's movements, the emotional triggers that shaped her decisions, and the weaknesses she attempted to hide beneath her cultivated confidence. The knowledge did not produce satisfaction, produced strategy. Her silence expanded into a calculated space where every detail served a purpose. She no longer allowed emotional reactions to interrupt her observations. Instead, she allowed herself to become almost spectral, drifting through the environment with a restrained presence that nobody questioned. Her sister's entitlement became more visible with each passing week. She grew increasingly careless, frequently reshaping events to suit her advantage without imagining that someone might be documenting the inconsistencies. The quiet one witnessed every shift with a steady calm, recognizing how predictable her sister had become. She understood that true damage would never come from confrontation. It would come from precision, timing, and a complete understanding of the person who believed herself untouchable. The quiet one maintained her outward composure, speaking only when necessary, contributing only when expected. Her silence allowed her to slip past suspicion with effortless ease, creating the illusion that nothing within her had changed. Yet beneath that stillness existed a growing structure, an internal architecture built from patience, memory, and a determination formed not from anger but from the desire to reclaim the dignity she had been denied for too many years. Every night, after the house settled into its familiar quiet, she reviewed her progress with unwavering focus. She examined her collected information, rearranged its order, and continued shaping it into a foundation strong enough to support the outcome she intended. The process did not feel vengeful. It felt necessary, as though she was restoring balance rather than seeking harm. Her sister remained confidently unaware, surrounded by the same unearned admiration the family had always provided. She could not comprehend that silence sometimes carried far more weight than accusation. She could not imagine that the quiet one had stopped enduring and had begun constructing. The preparation continued in absolute secrecy, advancing with a calm that no one mistook for anything significant. The quiet one understood that revenge did not require noise. It required accuracy, and accuracy required time. The quiet one's preparation eventually evolved into deliberate action, though her movements remained imperceptible to those around her. She did not confront her sister directly, nor did she announce her intentions. Every maneuver was subtle, precise, and strategically concealed within the rhythm of ordinary life. Her observations of family interactions allowed her to identify vulnerabilities that had previously gone unnoticed. Each weakness became an instrument in a silent symphony she had begun to conduct. She arranged small incidents that appeared accidental, yet each carried consequences carefully aligned with her long-term strategy. A misplaced document, a delayed response, a subtly altered schedule. Each action seemed trivial to the casual observer, yet it gradually shifted the balance in her favor. Her sister's own arrogance and reliance on assumed immunity became the perfect conduit for their exposure. Every action she had undertaken to dominate the family revealed itself piece by piece, without any direct interference from the quiet one. The family, accustomed to patterns of behavior, failed to perceive the deliberate orchestration unfolding before their eyes. They interpreted the small disruptions as minor oversights, unaware that the quiet one had intentionally positioned each element. Her silence functioned as camouflage, masking the deliberate intent behind her watchful presence. She no longer sought emotional satisfaction from the disruption she created. Her goal was control, the meticulous alignment of truth with consequence. Her sister, increasingly unaware of the subtle traps closing around her, began to experience growing unease. Small mistakes previously unnoticed became glaring failures. Inconsistencies that had once been easy to dismiss now accumulated into a pattern impossible to ignore. Her confidence wavered, though she remained unwilling or incapable of understanding the source of the instability. Every movement she made, every decision she took, was carefully observed and catalogued by the quiet one, who remained outwardly calm. The psychological weight of these invisible manipulations exerted itself slowly but inexorably. Her sister's entitlement, which had previously functioned as armor, began to show cracks. She attempted to assert authority to regain control, yet each effort only reinforced the quiet one's emerging advantage. The family, still oblivious to the careful orchestration behind these events, could only witness the gradual decline without comprehension of the cause. The quiet one did not act impulsively. She allowed patience to dictate the timing of each subtle intervention. Each move was measured, with consideration of its eventual effect on the sister's credibility and position within the family hierarchy. She understood that real power did not require confrontation, nor did it demand overt conflict. True influence functioned through perception, through the careful nudging of circumstances until the consequences naturally aligned with intention. By the end of this period, her sister's image within the household had begun to shift, though barely perceptibly. Confidence gave way to hesitation, and arrogance to subtle doubt. The quiet one's influence remained invisible, her strategic manipulations hidden behind the veil of ordinary activity. Silence, patience, and observation had become her instruments, and she wielded them with an exactness that promised a far-reaching culmination. The first wave of psychological traps had succeeded not with spectacle, but with the quiet accumulation of evidence, doubt, and disruption. Her sister, still unaware of the deliberate pattern, moved through the days with increasing anxiety and confusion. The quiet one continued to watch, to measure, and to wait, knowing that the ultimate moment of reckoning would arrive when precision and patience had converged into inevitability. Her sister's unease began to manifest in subtle but unmistakable ways. She attempted to regain the control she had long assumed was hers by inserting herself more aggressively into family interactions, striving to assert dominance where doubt had begun to creep. Every effort, however, was anticipated, carefully observed, and silently countered by the quiet one. What appeared as missteps or coincidences to the family were, in reality, deliberate consequences of actions long planned and patiently executed. The quiet one allowed her sister to move freely, confident that her own preparation would render every maneuver ineffective. As the sister tried to expose flaws, manipulate narratives, and regain favor, she only revealed more of her own vulnerabilities. Each poorly timed action, each misaligned word, each visible frustration became another thread in the tapestry the quiet one had been constructing. The family, accustomed to favoring her sister's charm, noticed the growing inconsistency but could not articulate its origin. Their perception remained clouded, leaving them unable to intervene or correct the trajectory that was unfolding before them. The quiet one did not speak, did not intervene, and did not react outwardly. Her stillness became a mirror, reflecting her sister's entitlement and insecurities back with stark clarity. The more her sister sought to dominate, the more visible her mistakes became, as though the household itself conspired against her. Every subtle miscalculation was observed, catalogued, and strategically leveraged for a future point of revelation. Silence, previously dismissed as passivity, functioned as the most precise instrument of control. The sister's frustration escalated with every failed attempt to assert superiority. She began to display patterns of irrational behavior, public impatience, private irritability, and repeated attempts to force situations into her favor. Each instance only reinforced the quiet one's internal advantage. The invisible traps, previously unnoticed, now had visible consequences. The sister's credibility, carefully cultivated over years, began to erode under the weight of small but undeniable inconsistencies. Even as tension grew, the quiet one maintained absolute composure. Her mind moved through scenarios with calculated clarity, ensuring that every eventuality reinforced the ultimate objective. She understood that exposure at the right moment would achieve far more than confrontation ever could. Every misstep by her sister became a silent confirmation that patience, observation, and precision would accomplish what anger or impulsive retaliation never could. By the time the family began to notice the subtle fractures in her sister's demeanor, the quiet one had already woven a web from which there was no escape. Her sister's own attempts to strike back had inadvertently delivered the evidence necessary to dismantle her credibility entirely. Each failed act of aggression, each futile strategy, and each unguarded expression now stood as proof of the manipulation she could not see. The quiet one's execution of her plan, entirely invisible until this point, had reached a stage where it required no additional force. Its momentum carried it to completion. Her sister's panic and confusion became increasingly apparent, though still unrecognized for what it truly was. The household could witness the tension but could not interpret its origin. The quiet one's control remained absolute, her presence serene and deliberate, a calm shadow against the unraveling chaos. The stage was now set for the final blow, the moment when all patience, observation, and meticulous preparation would converge into undeniable consequence. The quiet one's patience reached its apex as her sister's carefully constructed image began to collapse under the weight of her own actions. Every inconsistency, every impulsive response, every attempt to assert control without strategy accumulated into a narrative that could no longer be concealed. The family, though still partially blind to the orchestration behind these fractures, began to sense that the stability they had long attributed to her sister's dominance was no longer reliable. Subtle whispers of doubt permeated the household, creating tension in spaces previously untouched by scrutiny. Her sister struggled to maintain composure, but the cracks in her demeanor widened with every interaction. Minor mistakes that had once been dismissed became glaring indicators of incompetence and arrogance. The quiet one remained composed, unshaken, a silent witness to the unraveling of the person who had caused so much hidden pain. Every failed attempt by her sister to reassert authority only reinforced the quiet one's unspoken control over the unfolding reality. The family began to notice inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed, though they remained unable to connect the dots. It was not until the sister's frustration led her to overreach, exposing secrets she had spent years carefully hiding, that the true scope of the quiet one's silent influence became undeniable. What had once been subtle, almost imperceptible manipulations now manifested in visible consequences that reshaped the household's perception of her sister entirely. Through it all, the quiet one remained outwardly unchanged. Her face carried the same calm neutrality that had long masked her awareness, yet within, every observation, every recorded detail, every memory of past betrayals had converged into a singular clarity. She had allowed the sister to act freely, to reveal the fragility beneath her polished exterior. Patience had revealed what confrontation never could, the extent of entitlement, manipulation, and vulnerability that had been carefully cultivated and nurtured over the years. As the sister's collapse became more apparent, she oscillated between panic and desperate attempts to regain control, yet each effort only deepened the perception of instability. The Quiet One's silent orchestration had transformed ordinary familial dynamics into a stage where truth and consequence intersected with calculated inevitability. The household was now forced to reconcile the image they had idolized with the reality the Quiet One had allowed to emerge. By the culmination of this phase, the sister's manipulation had unraveled almost entirely. Every carefully hidden deceit had been revealed indirectly, every unearned advantage exposed, and the family's perception shifted irreversibly. The Quiet One's control had never required confrontation, loud declarations, or visible aggression. It existed entirely within the intersection of observation, patience, and precise action. The stage was prepared for the final revelation, the ultimate moment when silence would transform into a force that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The culmination arrived quietly, without announcement, yet it carried the full weight of inevitability. The Quiet One, having orchestrated every subtle disruption, every overlooked detail, every misstep her sister had made, now allowed the final piece of evidence to surface. It was a revelation that required no force, no drama, no confrontation. It existed in the facts she had meticulously collected over months, a constellation of truth that spoke louder than any argument ever could. Her sister, oblivious until the moment arrived, realized too late that every action, every maneuver, every desperate attempt to regain dominance had been anticipated and silently countered. The evidence, once scattered and seemingly insignificant, now formed a complete picture, leaving her defenseless against its unrelenting clarity. The family, watching with a mixture of shock and disbelief, absorbed the unfolding truth with growing comprehension. The sister's polished image fractured in real time, revealing entitlement, manipulation, and deception previously masked by charm and confidence. The Quiet One did not speak, did not celebrate, did not allow even the slightest expression of triumph to betray the intensity of her preparation. Her composure remained absolute, a calm surface above the intricate orchestration that had dismantled her sister's credibility completely. Each revelation fell into place naturally, as if guided by forces beyond the household's understanding, yet every detail had been deliberately arranged by the Quiet One herself. Her sister's panic became visible, her attempts at explanation incoherent and ineffective. The family struggled to reconcile years of admiration and acceptance with the stark reality now undeniable before them. The Quiet One's methodical patience had transformed silence into an instrument of justice. No outbursts, no shouting, no confrontation had been necessary. The final blow had been delivered not through action, but through foresight, observation, and the unrelenting accumulation of truth. As the sister crumbled, the Quiet One remained unmoved externally, her stillness now emblematic of control rather than submission. Every subtle misstep, every overlooked detail that her sister had relied upon, now reflected the inescapable consequences of entitlement left unexamined. The orchestration was complete, and the household could no longer ignore the transformation. The quiet girl, underestimated and overlooked for years, had exacted her retribution with precision and restraint. The final blow was not loud, not dramatic, and not spectacular. It was complete. It was final. The sister's collapse occurred entirely within the framework the Quiet One had constructed, an invisible architecture of patience and strategy that revealed itself only at the point where inevitability met truth. The Quiet One had never needed to raise her voice. She had never needed to act overtly. Her silence had spoken more profoundly than any words could, and in that silence, justice, once delayed, was finally realized. The house settled into a stillness that felt heavier than any silence before. Her sister remained broken, her image dismantled, and the family's perception irrevocably altered, yet the Quiet One made no move to announce victory. She walked through the familiar spaces with a calm that bordered on spectral, her presence almost imperceptible, as though she had never been involved at all. The accumulation of patience, observation, and deliberate action had achieved everything without theatrics, without confrontation, and without emotion displayed outwardly. In that moment, she understood the truth she had always carried quietly within herself. Endurance had never been weakness. Silence had not been surrender. It had been preparation, strategy, and an instrument more precise than any voice raised in anger. Every injustice endured, every humiliation absorbed, every slight unnoticed, had contributed to the architecture of inevitability that now defined the outcome. The family, still grappling with the realization of what had transpired, could only witness the calm that remained. They did not see the long hours of observation, the careful collection of evidence, the patience required to allow every action to reveal itself. They saw only the results, the dismantling of entitlement, the exposure of manipulation, and the quiet reclamation of dignity. The quiet one paused briefly, absorbing the depth of what had been accomplished. She felt no elation, no vindictive satisfaction, only a profound understanding of the power she had carried silently all along. Her stillness had become a force, one that had reshaped the household entirely, yet remained unseen until the precise moment of revelation. As she left the room, leaving the shattered traces of entitlement behind, she realized that silence had become more than a tool. It had become a voice, one that no one could deny, no one could counter, and no one could anticipate. The quiet girl had always existed within the margins, underestimated, overlooked, and disregarded. Yet in the end, her silence spoke louder than any accusation, more forcefully than any confrontation, and more completely than any immediate act of retaliation ever could. She walked away from the scene with measured steps, carrying only the calm certainty of one who had reclaimed her power through precision, patience, and unwavering clarity. The lesson remained unspoken, yet its weight was undeniable. The quiet girl, once dismissed, had orchestrated a reckoning that was both cold and absolute. Silence, in its purest form, had won.